Hello, everybody. It is Sunday, September the 1st, 2024. Happy September, everyone, although I'm sure many of you will be nostalgic for August, a month of holiday, vacation. New month, old subject. Yesterday on the show with Keith Tier, my friend from That Was the Week, the tech newsletter, we talked, as always, it seems, about AI. Keith believes that AI is about to revolutionize the way in which people code. Studying programming might not be such a wise thing anymore. And we talked about the possibility of AI in the creative industries. I referred to an interesting new piece that came out, I think, yesterday in the New Yorker by the excellent science fiction writer Ted Chiang, who believes that AI isn't going to make art. We are speaking specifically on that subject today with my guest, Bryan VanDyke. He's the author of a new book, In Our Likeness, an AI novel. There are so many of them these days, but this one seems to be a bestseller. Just came out. It's already got 1,400 reviews on Amazon. It's the #1 best-selling book in science fiction adventure. May not be that much of a surprise because it's published by Little A, that's Amazon's in-house imprint. Bryan is joining us from is it the Upper West Side or East Side, Bryan?
Upper West Side forever.
And it's Bryan VanDyke, a big V, big D. Bryan, where do you stand on I'm sure you've read the Chiang piece, you've written some similar pieces yourself. Is AI ever going to make art, write novels? What's your sense?
I think that eventually the AI capabilities to generate something that people enjoy and talk about, people read or watch and say, I loved it, or I was moved by it, or you need to see it, is entirely possible. I think that what people look for when they go to a book, especially a genre book, is not necessarily consistent with the idea of creating art, which I think many people, they think about this topic or they look at it, and really what they're saying is, can AI create something that's a reflection of the creation that a real human being would do? And I think that's out of reach for them, but I don't think that it's out of reach for these different AI capabilities to start producing things that people are excited to see.
Where are we in the narrative, the story of AI? I always use, I apologize, probably not very original, but I always imagine the baseball game. Are we in the top of the first inning when it comes to the possibilities in the creative industries of AI? Has the game already begun, or are we in mid-innings?
I think that we're very early. I think that there has been a response to some of the different AI tools by various creative industries, whether it's in the movies or it's been authors. And that response is a very logical one. It's to say, is my livelihood in danger? And that first response is the way that we make sure that this new technology, this new capability, doesn't just ride roughshod over everything that we do in the creative space. And so it's still to come, many of the different tools and capabilities. And as I said earlier, I do think that there will be certain components of storytelling or creating something that you watch that AI will continue to take over huge parts of. Just as a point of comparison, right? So there are full, bands that create songs that you love that have 4 or 5 members, and then there's sometimes individuals who do everything through either being a multi-instrumentalist or because they've used sampled sounds to create something that people are interested in. And we're in a place where that all coexists side by side. 30 years ago, for Gen Xers like me, it was all about, true recordings by singular musicians in a room at the same time, but it's not the same anymore. The world continues to change.
Are we always nostalgic, Bryan, for yesterday's technology? I often refer to Walter Benjamin, who's early 20th century German cultural critic, who's written very powerfully on this front. Is there always an element of looking backwards? Is technology, in a sense, even AI, a form of nostalgia?
Well, let me answer your question by making it more universal. I think we're always nostalgic. We're always looking back. There are those people who are more nostalgic than others, but inherently, um, humans, not to make too grand of a statement, but we're all living mortal lives, right? And we're all looking backward at some point and saying, well, what I've traversed and what I've done is finished. And therefore, it is very reasonable and the common reaction to look at the past and say, you've lost something that might be better, something that might, but at minimum, something that won't be recreated. And I think technology is a great, obsolete technology, which you're kind of alluding to, is a great vessel for us to put that wishfulness into. Um, I grew up in the cassette era, not in the record era, right? So when I went to the store to buy music, it was rows of cassette tapes, not CDs and not records. But I don't particularly long for cassette tapes. It's not a particular thing that I would like to go back to. But records have made a comeback, and many people who loved records certainly did sentimentalize them. And I think not every technology is going to be a nostalgic wishing stone that people look at, but it is very easy to do that. And
It's
books are.
interesting that you bring up cassettes. I'm not sure if you've seen Wim Wenders' new movie,
I
Perfect
have not.
Days.
No. Tell me.
It's a wonderful film about cleaning toilets in Japan and nostalgia for cassette tapes. Cassettes, you have to see the movie.
I've heard of it. I have heard of it. Yes.
It's one of the best films of the year. Certainly couldn't have been made by an AI.
Mm,
But the cassettes, and in Japan, of course, which tends to be particularly nostalgic about technology, and maybe there's a peculiar kind of Japanese narrative there. Cassettes don't. It's not the most reliable medium. Cassettes degenerate. It's a physical medium, but at the same time, there's a richness of sound of cassettes that you certainly don't get in digital, definitely not in downloads, not even in high quality digital downloads.
yeah.
Maybe you get it a little bit in vinyl, but it's almost like cassettes are like an exaggerated version of vinyl.
Mm. They've certainly got that hiss. There's a little
Which,
bit of a
probably
noise to them.
explains why now it's increasingly fashionable to collect cassettes. In this movie, Perfect Days, the hero of the film, a toilet cleaner, very romantic toilet cleaner, middle-aged man, goes around Tokyo selling copies of some of his more valuable cassette tapes, and they get large amounts of money in Japanese. It's not secondhand record stores, secondhand cassette stores. Anyway, you need to see the movie.
Yeah.
So coming back to this sense of nostalgia and AI and humanity, do you think that one of the conditions of modernity, I know you have a particular interest in E.T.A. Hoffman, who's one of the great romantic writers reacting, I guess, against modernity, that in the modern age, as we sense our quote unquote humanity is at risk or changing or slipping from our grip, we're obsessed with technologies that undermine our humanity. So AI is just the most recent chapter in all this.
Indeed. I mean, the example of E.T.A. Hoffman is a great one. And in his age, when he lived, he was witness to many of the types of changes that we're talking about either happening now or coming in the near future.
And just to remind our viewers, not everyone has Wikipedia at their fingertips, but Hoffman lived between 1776 and 1822, at least according to Wikipedia.
That's right, which we can mostly trust. He was born into a time of great change. I believe he was born in Prussia, which didn't even exist during his lifetime. He witnessed a lot of the technology innovations that came along through the same shock to the system that people talk about when they talk about Mary Shelley or talk about the early 1800s, 1820s, books like Frankenstein, others, which are great Gothic stories. And E.T.A. Hoffman writes a number of great Gothic short stories himself. But the Gothic sentiment is used in order to capture that shock feeling that these people had when they experienced something that they thought only human beings could do. So in E.T.A. Hoffman's case, he was a musician, and there were many different innovations created at the time, which allowed pianos to play by themselves, allowed different instruments to mimic noises which previously only a human being could do. And it shocked him, and it sent him into a place of reevaluation of what does it mean to be human. If a machine can do this, then what is it that makes us different? And that same problem is the problem that people experience when they come face to face with an AI product or capability which they thought only a person could do. It forces a reevaluation of what is a person and what is it that makes me as an individual special or stand out.
Do you think it's any coincidence, Bryan, that the idea of AI, computer software, was invented by a woman called Ada Lovelace, who was the daughter of Lord Byron? So she was part of the same circle of writers and poets and romantics who were also obsessed with the issue of how technology was undermining our humanity.
Absolutely. So Ada Lovelace, only surviving child of Lord Byron, she was raised completely outside of his remit because he was considered a ne'er-do-well and an absolutely horrible influence. Plus, he died very young. But what that actually says to me is that it wasn't even just this closed circle. It was actually part of an entire ethos at the time at a certain echelon in English society where she grew up, but also all of Europe. You can take that same point of view and that same way of looking at these changes that have occurred, these technologies that come along. And absolutely, those are the people who make a great change. And you can look at the innovators of our more modern era. And yet again, they come from a small group of people, to your point, who look at things differently and say, what could I do with this new thing? How could Tim Berners-Lee make something interesting of hypertext and hyperlinking? And then the next people take it and turn it into the next thing. And before you know it, we have a global World Wide Web.
And I don't think, again, Bryan, it's any irony that that we have now, and your book is part of this, an avalanche. Some people might even think of it as a glut of literature, not nonfiction literature, but fictional literature on AI itself. When we are told, and you talked about this at the beginning, Chang argues that AI isn't capable of writing literature or making movies or creating art. So in a sense, it might be a kind of reaction. What is it about AI which makes people so obsessed with writing AI novels? Last week I had Pedro Domingos on the show.
Yes.
He's a very distinguished computer scientist. His book on AI, Master Algorithm, was a huge bestseller, but his latest book, oddly enough, a follow-up book, is a novel, a dystopian novel, or a kind of dystopian novel, what he calls a Silicon Valley satire 2040, in which he imagines an AI running for American president. So what is it about AI that brings out the novelist in all of us, whether we're computer scientists or marketing gurus like yourself?
Yeah. So I think that people who write books come to storytelling for a number of reasons. It might be because you wanted to tell a great story. And if you're going to tell a great story, you need something that's recognizably a threat or recognizably a risk or somehow creates some drama. And we are inundated with headlines that talk about how AI will be replacing various portions of our society, various elements of how people earn their livelihood. And so there's a built-in curiosity as well as some fear, which if you're going to tell a great story, you want to have. In part, I think that connects to the story that I wanted to tell in Our Likeness. But I actually, in composing the book, I was thinking in terms of a few different levels that I wanted to appeal to people. And really, I came to the book through thinking about technology writ large, not just AI per se. I drafted the book in 2018. And the first draft of it was written early on, OpenAI was a company, but it was not out there in the world with ChatGPT. We weren't talking about large language models in podcasts that the common person would listen to. Those things all came along a little later. For me, what I was looking to do was to try to find a way to reflect and grapple with what technology does to us as people. And AI is just another facet of that. And our conversation about E.T.A. Hoffman or about Mary Shelley or fill in the blanks for the 200 years between Frankenstein and now, there's more examples out there.
Oscar Wilde's Picture of Dorian Gray is another book that
Picture Gray, yeah, absolutely. So that's a great example of an amazing device that was deployed in order to do some storytelling. So for me, the question that I'm most interested in is what happens to our sense of ourselves, how we treat each other as you continue to introduce these different technologies. And AI is just the most recent. You can continue to go back through time. You can look at any media technology, right, that's out there, television, telephone. You go back to the telegraph if you want. They all alter how society works and how people interact, and all those things affect the individual. And a good novel is about the impact of the world or of circumstances on a person. And that's what, in writing my book, I was trying to do. And sometimes they're good people, sometimes they're bad people. The Picture of Dorian Gray is a great example. I don't think you want to emulate most anyone in that book. Similarly, when I read it, I thought, how do I create something which is as creative as this, but make it a modern story? And so rather than having a picture, a painting that changes based on someone's real world experiences, I thought, what if I turned it around? What if the story was how what you introduce into social media alters the real world, which happens to be, you might call it a metaphor, because that is what happens in our world today. There are a lot of things, and we could talk for an hour and a half easily just about misinformation and fake news that actually matters to people. They think it's real, and it kind of doesn't matter if it's true or not. If they believe it, it's going to have an impact. And so those are the things that I wanted to play with in this novel.
I want to get to the novel in a second, In Our Likeness. As I said, it's already a bestseller, and it's only been out about half a day, which is quite an achievement, Bryan. But coming back to this, maybe let me rephrase that question about the game and where we are in the game in this narrative of AI. Where are we, do you think, in the narrative of novels, whether they're science fictional novels or more literary novels, or yours is a kind of mix? About AI in 20, 30, 40, 50 years time, when AI will clearly be more powerful? We probably won't have AGI, although that's another subject for a show. But as AI becomes more embedded, more like electricity, somehow ubiquitous and invisible, are we going to see more or less novels about AI? Or will it be something that we just get bored with, like electricity? I'm sure there was a time in the 1880s, 1890s, early 20th century where there were lots of novels about electricity. Now there aren't any.
Yeah. I think that it will continue to be a little bit of a dash of seasoning that you'll see right now. But as it becomes more normalized to have, let's say, a chatbot be something that you are interacting with throughout your life, in your day-to-day life, it will begin to be incorporated more and more into the fictional texts that we read. It's a bit exotic right now, right? Your electricity example is a great one. I'm sure that we could go back and find a novel from 1910 that uses automobiles in a way that really like breaks the storytelling almost to bring an automobile in. And in fact, you get 15 more years along, and you get the F. Scott Fitzgerald writing, and it becomes more ingrained in just a cultural signifier, right? So the automobiles just help you know that it's wealthy people driving around in West Egg, right?
And running poor people over.
And running poor people over, right? They become incorporated into the plot and into the storytelling. And then eventually they become wallpaper, right? They're not as interesting. So to your question, where are we? If I have to kind of predict, we are super early in the incorporation of these technologies into novels and storytelling. When I was drafting the first draft of this, I was very worried about the timelines that occur with it. I was hoping that I would sell the book, but didn't think I necessarily would. You sell a book, as I'm sure you know, Andrew, it usually takes 1.5 years, 2 years before it's out in the world. So if
Yeah,
you're
if you're
trying
lucky.
to,
I mean, there's nothing or nobody slower than the traditional publishing industry, which is, I assume, why you sold your thing to Amazon, who are fast.
So the timeline was still 1.5 years, right?
And it was written when you sold it. I want to actually come to that
That's
later.
right.
But coming back to this timeline,
Yeah.
Bryan, you have I found a rather moving piece that's coming out next week in Lit Hub about your mom and your very close relationship with her. And you talk about how she might react to the success of your book. She unfortunately is no longer around. You talk about a grief bot here. And I'm quoting you, my mom would hate the idea of becoming a grief bot. Do you think things like grief bots will become standard by, I don't know, 2050, 2060? Which to most of us today seems not only bizarre, but in rather bad taste.
I think that there will be a strong industry for grief bots in far sooner than 2050. I mean, let's say 2035 or 2030. It's not that hard if you have enough material to begin to have a model emulate the patterns of a person. We see that with deep fakes in video. You don't need much video, right, in order to generate it. In addition, if you took all the emails that I wrote over my lifetime to my mother, and you took every note that I've saved and every little bit of video on my phone, and you uploaded it all into the cloud, and you let an adequately sophisticated model go to work on it, I'm absolutely certain that it could produce, even today, something that would be convincing for a brief snippet of time. And as I say in the essay, my mom was I used to call her the family archivist. She would keep everything. I have a rich, detailed history of my own childhood because of all the things that she kept. And if you have that level of history, it's not easy to create a simulacra, right? A simulacrum of it, and to then interact with it is also very easy, as we know from talking with chatbots. So it's not hard, and it's already out there where people are trying to create these grief bots, which to me, I'm of two minds about them. On the one hand, I think they're fascinating intellectually and from a technology point of view. Personally, as I said, I think my mother would be appalled by it because they're not true. They're not real.
You're
right?
dead or you're alive,
You're
mother.
dead or you're alive, especially to a Midwesterner.
No, would your mother be appalled as a dead or alive?
Dead or alive, I think. Either one. Yeah.
Yeah.
She would be. I think
so she's turning I don't mean to mock your dead mother, but she'd be turning in her grave if she
That's exactly right. No, you're exactly right. And I think that especially to a Midwesterner born in 1943 who is very much about the facts as they are and the world is black and white, like, why would you create this thing? It's an abomination in some ways, right? But never underestimate the human heart's need to continue to convene with something that it loves. We started talking about old technologies and cassette tapes, and I think you almost waxed, longingly for cassette tapes. Well,
and you will once you see the new Vendors movie too.
Maybe exactly right. But it's not hard for people to get there, and so I think it's nothing short of inevitable to be out there, and it'll be hard then for people who don't want to do it to say, well, why don't I want to talk with this person one more time, especially lives that are cut short for people.
Yeah, so I have two responses to this, and I think you're right that there is and I don't like this word inevitability because it's dangerous, but it's very likely that grief bots will become more and more acceptable. Just as if we were having this conversation in 1990 and we talked about the inevitability of people posting everything about themselves online, you'd think, well, that's not very likely. But of course, it's become central to the way we live. There's two ways of thinking about this. On the one hand, grief bots can't read between the lines. So it could never really get to the core of your mom or your relationship with her, because those are unspoken, unwritten things, which can't just be represented in text. The other way of thinking about it is that this mirror, and we obviously AI is a kind of mirror, lots of books written with the word mirror in the title,
Mm-hmm.
that it actually reflects how how uninspiring we are, how
Yeah.
unprofound our lives as individuals or in our relationships. Once the algorithm can master a relationship between mother and child, it would find that most mother and child relationships are actually rather similar. Which of those two views do you think is fairer?
Well, I think that it's fair to say that the things that make each of us feel important or distinct, if you model them out mathematically, uh, they're the things that make them truly unique are very, very small. There's not much. And it is, in fact, the track that we take through our lives and our individual experiences on the very common stage that we all walk on and perform each day on. That's the only thing that makes us who we are. And that's a thread through the book too, which is this thread of memory, which to me, those shared experiences that we have, back to the mother and son relationship, which is at the core of the book, really is a mother-son relationship. It's founded on shared history. And as that erodes, and as memory fades, or as people go their separate ways, you're left with only what you recall from it. And that's where the uniqueness of the identity resides. And to your point, unless we can get neural scanning of memories, and now we're way out there in terms of like what's possible, and who knows where the world will go, but that's not as imminent as the ability to scan outward expressions that people do, and outward expressions are really convincing. I think it depends on how much you want to train it, right? If somebody wants to spend the time with a simulation or a grief bot, they could probably turn it into something that services a certain emotional need, but it's never the same as real life, as none of these things ever are.
And it seems as if some of the most powerful people, like Sam Altman in the AI industry, are obsessed with this sort of thing of taking or paying for other people's voices and creating these bots that will inevitably become grief bots. We're going to come to the book in one more question. Bryan, you've been very patient. I often ask my guests who come on the show who talking about AI and bots and have written books about artificial intelligence, how they could prove to me and our viewers and listeners that you yourself aren't a bot. It's a kind of Keenan Turing test.
Sure.
How would you convince someone listening or watching to this that you're not a bot?
I think it would be particularly hard. I think there's two ways. There's two ways that I would suggest. One of them comes from the book, and the other one is more of a observation of someone who fancies himself an artist. I think that I'll take the artistic one first. Individual expression is when a person or an artist or anybody does something that goes beyond, it isn't just the average of what you would expect. So the reason that it's really easy to detect a lot of the chat GPT text that comes out is that the language is just so flat. Things are exactly as you would expect. It's those things that are unexpected, those metaphors that you don't see coming, that moment when you find yourself staring at a light at the end of the tunnel that becomes the train coming at you, and it comes out of an unexpected place. That's when a person's communicating with you, right? And so as you listen to me talk and I pull in examples of things that you don't hear as readily, that's when I would be beyond the math that's behind an AI, right? Because an AI or a model is looking for the most likely next word, not for the thing that necessarily...
so to speak, can you use math, Bryan, to get beyond the math? Could someone design a bot?
I think there's
that's premised exactly on surprise. At the moment, these AI companies, Anthropic, OpenAI, they all seem terrified of getting sued and of saying the wrong thing. But maybe one made by somebody like Elon Musk, who seems to go out of his way to offend.
I think Kurt Gödel would tell you no. The incompleteness theorem tells you that you can never have a system that can be, fully able to describe itself. There's always things outside of the system, right? So that then gets to the question of what is human consciousness. Is it bound? It must be bounded by something, and so maybe we could one day get to the math, but I think we're a long way from that math. So that's my first way to know I'm not an AI. The second one, which comes from the book talks about the sweaty balls test as the replacement of the Turing test, and it's supposed to be a little tongue in cheek, but it's a reference to the Saturday Night Live skit with Pete Sweaty, who talks about a Christmas gift of sorts that he sells, and it's quite funny. But if you read the text of it, it's all in the delivery of the double entendre that's a part of it. And so chatbots and AI are extremely literal, and when they're not, they're usually operating on pretty cheesy
Although
puns.
a lot of people, particularly out here, Bryan, in Silicon Valley, are also very literal. Let's get to the
Yep.
book.
Yeah.
Briefly, tell me what the story or the non-story in Our Likeness is.
Yeah, so it is a novel about a group of people who work at a technology startup that creates chatbots. There's a new algorithm behind a new chatbot that the narrator of the book tests. It's meant to detect lies that are posted online and fake news. And what he discovers is that, in fact, whatever is put into the database for the algorithm becomes true in the real world. And so what begins as something where you think that it's about detecting things that are false online, it becomes the ability to actually change people.
So give me an example of how that works.
So the narrator has a crush on the woman who creates the algorithm. She has a number of, she has full sleeve tattoos on her arms. And as a way of testing it, he puts pictures on the internet of her without her tattoos, thinking that that will immediately trip the alarm, as it were. But what happens is in the real world, suddenly she loses them, and she loses all memory of them. And so there is, I would call it a sort of a Philip K. Dick sort of element to this, where reality itself begins to become.
So is there a form of magic here that technology shapes the world rather than the world shaping technology?
Arthur C. Clarke would tell you the best, most fully realized technology is indistinguishable from magic. But I would agree with you that
But there's no one actually work. I mean, in reality, even the Musks and Altmans of the world haven't invested in companies where the technology creates the reality of the world.
Well, you could argue that social media does that today. So I did not write it. I wrote it absolutely to your point, not wishing to try to describe a science that's at work. It's not science fiction, not hard science fiction in that way. Instead, yes, it's got a magical element, just as the picture in Dorian Gray. We don't know how that works. But I would argue that as a metaphor and an analogy, does not social media shape how we look at the world all the time? I've never met many political figures, yet I find myself reading endless articles about them. And what they have to say, I'm talking with people that I know who also have never met them. So this notion of reality is maybe a little more malleable than a deeply analytical point of view would demand.
You sold the book, or your agent sold the book. You wrote it in around 2018. It got sold maybe a year ago or a year and a half ago to Little A, an imprint owned by Amazon. How long did the book take you to write?
So I wrote the book's first draft in 2018, revised it off and on for about 3 or 4 years after that. I would say, what I tend to do is write something, then take it and try to lock it away in a drawer for a little while so that I can figure out what works and what doesn't with a fresh eye to it. So really the book finished having me tinker with it ahead of getting an agent in 2022. I actually had a goal of a certain number of rejections to agents. And in December of 2022, I was 3 short of the number that I had set for myself when I was going to quit.
How many was that?
It was 30 rejections from agents spanning 2021 and 2022.
So that's concrete rejections as opposed
concrete.
to
Not non-responses. Non-responses go much higher. So people who agreed to take a look at something. And I got a lot of rejections that were very nice and polite, said, I just don't know how to position this. This seems strange, but then a big thing happened around September of 2022. The press started covering ChatGPT. And in December of 2022, I asked ChatGPT to write a query letter for me. And this seems really obvious as something that people would do now, but in December of 2022, it was a little bit more unique. And I actually took that query letter and I put a postscript on it and said, by the way, this was written by ChatGPT. This isn't it crazy what technology can do? And I sent it to 3 agents, and I had a response from one of them within 10 minutes, who then asked for the full manuscript. And in 6 days, he called me up and said, I really want to work with you on this. And I said, this is kind of amazing. No one has known how to place it before, but I think he was really, that's my current agent, Elias Altman. He had a particular view of how this all fit together and where society was going. And he's been an excellent advocate, as have the folks at Little A.
Some people might be listening to this, Bryan, thinking this is all rather depressing. Took you 3 years to write. You live on the Upper East Side. You have a day job. You're a tech consultant. You've done quite well for yourself. What does your story tell us about not maybe the fate of artists in the age of AI, but the fate of the artist in the age, in the digital age? It's not just AI, it's social media, it's the way in which the internet is changing everything.
Sure.
It's not a model that most people could pursue, or it's a hard model. You have a real day job, so you must have been writing in the evenings and at the weekends. You clearly have a lot of self-confidence. You've written and rewritten. You've taken all the rejections. What does that tell us about the fate of the artist in the 2020s and onwards?
You know, my wife described me as an artist the other day and said I was incredibly patient. This was not who I was when I started. When I was in college, and then I got an MFA. I was very young in my MFA program.
Yeah, and you got your MFA at Columbia. You invested a lot of time and
a lot of
presumably
time,
money into this.
I had 4 jobs when I was at Columbia. I worked for Columbia. I worked building websites. I worked tutoring people. And I worked as a freelance journalist. And I did that because I had all this energy and belief in myself that what I was doing, what I was writing was somehow worth the time. I'll tell you, not a single word that I wrote at that phase in my life will ever see anything out of the world because it is not very good.
Was your mom horrified, or did she encourage you?
I like to tell the story sometimes about how I told my parents on a cold autumn day in Evanston, Illinois, when I was at Northwestern, that I was going to be a poetry major. Because I'm now a parent of a 16-year-old and a 13-year-old. I mean, what a message to receive when your child is going to a school with a very expensive tuition, which I had some financial aid for, but which, we did incur some loans, quite a few. They took it in stride. I'd say my mom basically said, okay, how does a poet pay for his life? How does he do it? And my parents were really
good question,
effective.
wasn't it?
Yeah, my parents were very effective at saying, okay, you want to do that? You can do it, but just remember, how will you live? And so that pushed me to follow a 2-pronged path, like, build websites, do things that would make money, have a career. And if you really believe in this other thing, this artistic path, then find a way to do that as well. And I don't think that's very unique. I think,
well, it's not unique, but it's hard to do. Has anything really changed, do you think, since the time of Oscar Wilde or even E.T.A. Hoffman? I mean, these were in a way literary aristocrats, but one of the things that some people worry about is that only the wealthy now have the time or the energy or the resources to write books or make art or movies. Now, you're unusual in that sense, but is there a danger in our digital age that in our increasingly unequal society, art itself will, and the creative impulse will become a luxury of the wealthy and powerful?
I think it's always a risk, but I think you give an example in E.T.A. Hoffman of somebody whose life was in an employment to make sure that the musical society, I forget exactly which one he was a part of, actually continued to function. Like, he had a day job, right? He had to work. He was trained as a lawyer. He had a commission. His writing was not done as his day job. It was his side gig. Oscar Wilde was fairly famously destitute at various points. You can go back and look at William Faulkner, who says he wrote some of his novels on the back of a shovel, I believe he says. You can continue to find examples of writers who found a way. You take Cormac McCarthy, who absolutely lived in total, penury for various points. It's almost part of the fantasy that people put out there, that an artist struggles and that they can't quite make it, and it just starts to build into the story of what people, I think, want.
Although those stories are fine because the writer makes it, of course. For every
Sure.
Faulkner, there are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of failures who live in penury and never publish anything.
Yes.
So that's the dark
It's a risk
side.
that's always there. I think you're right.
It's a risk, but a very American risk. Your book, when did it just come out?
So the book, today is the pub day for all
Well, it's
formats.
already right, but
It
it's
came out
already
a month ago.
yeah, it's
Amazon
already
started promoting it as part of their First Reads program. So they have a program that people who enroll in it, they get early access to books. And so they began promoting it to a subset of some readers. And so I'm so appreciative of this program. At today's pub day, and you're showing the screen, it's got 1,400 ratings already.
It's got 1,400. It's the top, but it's the bestseller. And this is not some sort of obscure category in science fiction adventure.
My preferred category, though, is today it's number 2 in dystopian books, behind only George Orwell. So
well,
I can accept that. I can accept
you've beaten
coming in second.
Huxley, you've beaten, and it's probably number 2 in utopias as well. I'm thrilled for you, Bryan. It's great news for Bryan VanDyke. But does it suggest something is a little bit off in the publishing industry? That Amazon bought it, or their little A publishing house bought it, and now they're promoting it internally. It's almost as if Google is promoting YouTube on the search engine. I'm not suggesting they do this in a corrupt way, but is it a lot for every best-selling novel? There are lots of obscure ones. Should there be rules about what Amazon can and can't promote?
At one point in my career, I had a job which included taking a look at the Amazon marketplace ecosystem and the different brands that were on it. And what we did is we advised brands on how to be visible in the Amazon ecosystem, in addition to the broader internet at large. And what we found as part of it was that, there were some rules, there were some best practices in the particular Amazon environment, and they were distinct to that environment. But that was true everywhere. If you wanted to make sure that your products were sold at Macy's, or if you wanted to make sure that you had visibility in Walmart, no matter where you went, there were gatekeepers who were involved in shelf space, access, promotion. And so I believe that what you see with Amazon with publishing, they've got the same apparatus that you'd see at a big publisher. So,
so if you go to Safeway and you go there and you're planning to check out, and you're surrounded by products that they're trying to sell, a lot of them are Safeway products. Finally, Bryan, and again, I'm just curious on this front. The book, I think this is the digital version on Kindle, sells for $6. A lot of debate about how much of the money it's a question about YouTube as well. It's coming back to the creative. How much of that are you seeing of the $6? It's clearly selling very well. It's got already 1,400 reviews, which is means that I would guess 50,000 people buy it. But then you're saying a lot of people are getting it for free.
So the model that's in place with Amazon is just like every other one, with an advance, with recovering against that advance. It's the traditional model that you'd see from any publisher. I actually don't know how much of the $6.99. I'd have to go back and read the contract. I'm just elated that when you take a look at it today, there's 1,400 people who rated it. When I When my wife and I met, and she asked what my aspirations in life were and what I wanted to do, I talked about wanting to be a writer. And over the many years, we talked about what it would take to feel like I was a success. My lifelong goal for this book was to have 2,000 people read it. To me, and you look at traditional, distribution, 2,000 is a great number, for a literary fiction book.
That's high. I mean, I don't
It's
know what
high. That's high.
percentage.
And so we're on day one, and 1,400 people have given it a rating. So to me, it's phenomenal from that point of view. And what it affords to me, I hope, is the opportunity to continue to bring ideas into the marketplace, to pitch different books. And to your point, the path for art and for a writer is a complicated one. And so you have to celebrate all the wins along the way. This is a huge one for me. I'm super excited.
To put it mildly. And of course, the big challenge now, Bryan, is a follow-up. You working on anything?
I do. I have a couple. I have two different books that I'm actively working on. I have one that is in the same creative space as this book. It is, let's call it spiritually a sequel, in the sense that it continues to look at at our relationship with technology, and takes a view to the distorted sense of our realities as we interact with it. And I hope to be able to bring more things forward in the near future.
Any movie rights sold? We all think of Blade Runner, of course, when it comes to AI. I mentioned Wim Wenders. It's not an AI movie. Maybe Wenders can make the movie of In Our Likeness.
I would love to work with somebody on it.
Well, if Wim Wenders, if you're watching, you can buy the movie rights to In Our Likeness. Bryan VanDyke. It's always nice, Bryan, to have a good story. There's so many stories of failure of one kind or another, a story of success. I don't think this is the last time we will be hearing about Bryan VanDyke. His new book, In Our Likeness, already a bestseller. And Bryan, congratulations.
Thank you.
And I hope we'll get you back on the show in the not too distant future to talk about AI, creativity, and where we are in the baseball game. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Would love it. Thank you so much for having me.